Fellas, we've just had UFC Fight Night Paris, Benoit Denis versus Renato Moicano. One of the best fight nights this year, definitely. I feel like the crowd in Paris is definitely the best crowd in the UFC, and it was a really good card as well. A lot of talking points, and we're going to be matchmaking every main card fighter after UFC Paris. Every fighter that competed on the main card, whether they won or they lost, we're going to be matchmaking into a fight. And we'll start off with the first fight on the card, which was Ziam versus Frevola. I need to have a formal apology to Ziam for calling him, kind of boring before this fight. And I was saying that because, it must have been the Jai Herbert performance. That fight with Jai Herbert that he had wasn't very interesting, and he'd never finished anyone in the UFC prior to this fight. But man, that was such a good performance. That might even be like a performance of the year contender for Ziam. To go out there in France, not only to dominate Frevola for the entire fight, both grappling exchanges and striking exchanges, but to end it off with one of the most brutal knockouts we've seen this year. What a performance by Ziam. If anything, he deserves 2 performance bonuses for that fight. But we'll start off with the loser in Frevola. 2 losses in a row now, both by finish. I think we give him a fight that's winnable, and I think we give him Michael Johnson. Now, you might be looking at Michael Johnson as, why would you give him Michael Johnson? He's way past that now, but he's been KO'd in his last 2 fights, to be fair, as Frevola. He needs a win that's winnable for him. I was originally thinking we'd give him somebody like Jousset, who's looking for a fight, but then again, I don't think he's going to be wanting to wait until like May next year, which is probably when Frevola's going to be back. So I think we give him Michael Johnson, one of the most inconsistent fighters in the UFC. He can lose against bums, but then win against some of the best. He is coming off a win as well this year, and I feel like he's kind of that good opponent for Frevola, because it is a winnable fight for Frevola, and he should win this fight. Let's say that you schedule this fight next year, he should win this fight. But again, he's returning off 2 knockout losses in a row now. Michael Johnson can be the guy to get it done. He's coming off a win. He's extremely inconsistent and unpredictable. He's Michael Johnson. So I feel like we do Matt Frevola versus Michael Johnson. Bit of a layup for Matt Frevola. Sometime next year, he's probably going to be out for absolutely ages. Not only did he take a beating in that fight, but again, that was such a brutal KO, up there with like Josh Emmett and Bryce Mitchell levels of brutal. So he's probably not going to be back for another 9, maybe 10 months as well. So I think for Matt Frevola, him versus Michael Johnson, a winnable fight for him, but not just a complete can that we're giving him off the streets. And then for Ziam, I think we do him versus Bobby Green. Ziam he's kind of in that pool of people now in like the unranked lightweights that are really good. Guys like Yoel Alvarez, guys like Ludovic Klein, who just fought on this card. Guys like Mitabek Oraban, I think he's joined him now. That was an extremely good performance against Matt Frevola, and I feel like he's 1 fight away from getting ranked, and Bobby Green's that perfect fight. Bobby Green's probably still going to be out for a while because obviously got injured against Paddy Pimblett, and he took a beating and he was unconscious. So he's probably going to be out for until like, I don't know, that mid next year, maybe early next year. So I think we do Ziam versus Bobby Green, maybe like a fight night co-main event or something like that. And if you can beat Bobby Green, send him into the rankings, give him the Paddy Pimbletts, give him the Jalin Turners, the Rafael dos Anjos. But it's also a winnable fight for Bobby Green because Bobby Green's got good takedown defense to counter the grappling for Ziam, and he's a really slick boxer as well. So I think Bobby Green versus Ziam, tough test for Ziam, but if you can beat Bobby Green, give him a ranked fight, and I feel like it's also a banger of a fight as well. Like I said, I think their styles match up really interestingly, and it can potentially be a good comeback fight for Bobby Green, but it's also the next big step for Ziam and getting closer to those rankings. So I think we do Ziam versus Bobby Green again. I know a lot of people are going to be wanting to see him get a ranked fighter, but there is so many unranked lightweights right now that I've said deserve a ranking spot. Even guys like Diego Ferreira deserve a ranking spot. So I think he has to join the queue and beat Bobby Green. And if he can beat Bobby Green, give him a ranked fighter. So that's the first fight on the card. Then we had Morgan Charriere versus Gabriel Miranda. Morgan Charriere lands a perfect shot in the second round, knocks out Gabriel Miranda, but Gabriel Miranda didn't look too bad. So for Gabriel Miranda, I think we go out there and give him Blake Bilder. Blake Bilder's 2-2 in the UFC. He hasn't had the best start in his UFC career, similar to Miranda. They've both beaten mutual opponents, and I think it's just kind of one of those fights against another guy who's kind of not been doing the best in the UFC recently for Miranda. A bit of a random matchup, but I've just tried looking at someone who's not had the best start to his UFC career. So I think we're doing Miranda versus Bilder, or just anyone who's kind of joined the UFC, picked up a couple of wins, picked up a couple of losses, and need to get some momentum. So I think we do that for Gabriel Miranda. And then for Morgan Charriere, there's a lot of good options for him right now. I think we do him versus the winner of Charles Jourdain and Victor Henry. Now, Charles Jourdain and Victor Henry are going to be taking each other on. I don't know the exact card, but they're going to be taking each other on in their fight night later this year. And I think the winner of that fight should take on Morgan Charriere. I was originally going to do him versus Charles Jourdain. Charles Jourdain has lost a shit ton of fights. He's won a shit ton of fights. He's experienced. I think it's that perfect step up for Morgan Charriere right now in the UFC, who's 2-1, and even that one loss could have been a win as well. But since he's macked up against Victor Henry, I thought, you may as well just do the winner against Morgan Charriere. I think this is a good step up. He's facing guys that are more experienced, and obviously if he ends up going against somebody like Charles Jourdain, he's facing somebody who's had a lot of, like I said, a lot more experience in the UFC. A guy who's fought a lot of these top guys like Gene Silver. But it's also a very winnable fight for Morgan Charriere. Jousset isn't the best. His fight IQ is very questionable. He's not the most dangerous striker. And I think Morgan Charriere, his boxing that he's been displaying in his past couple of UFC fights, he definitely has the capability to outbox both of these guys. So I think Morgan Charriere, the next step for him is to fight the winner of Jousset and Victor Henry sometime next year in some sort of fight night. And because he's got a lot of potential, really good boxer, really dangerous guy, went out there and brutally not brutally, but knocked out Gabriel Miranda as well, so that was impressive. Then the next fight we had was Kevin Jousset versus Bryan Battle. Bryan Battle made himself a star tonight, went out there and shut down the prospect of Kevin Jousset, getting that TKO in the second round. This was a really fun fight. I mean, Bryan Battle wasn't afraid from engaging in the clinches, and he was just landing so many shots on Kevin Jousset, just completely outboxing him, got the win, grabbed the mic, and riled up Paris. One of the best post-fight interviews I've seen in a while. So for Kevin Jousset, I think we should do him versus Sam Patterson. Sam Patterson's kind of like, well, he's from the UK. He's had a bit of an up-and-down UFC career. Had a good start to his UFC career. Pretty sure he came from the Contender Series. Obviously had that absolutely brutal knockout from Yanal Ashmouz. Then he ended up getting a win over Kiefer Crosby recently. And he obviously got a win before that as well. And Kevin Jousset, he's also beaten Kiefer Crosby. They've both beaten him by submission in the first round. And I think stylistically it's a really interesting matchup. Two guys that are really good grapplers. Two guys that have a very grappling-heavy approach. And it's a bit of a step down from Bryan Battle because obviously Sam Patterson hasn't shot or proved himself as much as Bryan Battle and he's nowhere near as good on the feet. But he did look really good in his last fight against Kiefer Crosby, and he's put together a bit of a winning streak now. So I think Kevin Jousset versus Sam Patterson, two good grapplers, two guys who have beaten Kiefer Crosby, two guys who have also suffered some big defeats in the UFC. So that's what I think should be next for Kevin Jousset. And then for Bryan Battle, I think he's only one or two more fights away from potentially getting a ranked fight in the welterweight division. So I think we do him versus Nicolas Dalby. I've matched a couple of guys up against Nicolas Dalby, but I think he's one of the best unranked welterweights in the world. I think some people can argue that he should have even beaten Renato Fakhretdinov at UFC, Saudi Arabia early this year. And Nicolas Dalby's that really good test for Bryan Battle. He's got a really good stamina. I have to always mute the audio when he's fighting because if you've ever listened to a Nicolas Dalby fight, you'll understand why. But no, he's got a good pace. He's a really good wrestler. He's quite dangerous on the feet. He's got that walk forward style, good pressure, and I think he's a good test for Bryan Battle. And if Bryan Battle can get past Nicolas Dalby, who previous to that Renato Fakhretdinov fight was on a streak, and like I said, he arguably could have won that Renato Fakhretdinov fight. I think we do Bryan Battle against maybe someone in the rankings or someone closer to the rankings. So for Bryan Battle, really impressive performance. I think him versus Renato Fakhretdinov could be next. And then the next fight was Joanderson Brito versus William Gomis. William Gomis somehow picked up a decision. I think this was a terrible decision. Look, don't get me wrong. William Gomis impressed me. He did better than I thought he would against Joanderson Brito. I thought, Brito was going to get a complete, just domination on him, and that wasn't the case. But I don't think he should have won that fight. I thought that was a very clear win to Joanderson Brito. And William Gomis got the win, but it's unfortunate. There's nothing we can really do about it now. So for Joanderson Brito, I think we do him versus Nathaniel Wood. I think this could be a really good fight. Nathaniel Wood's one of the most technically sound fighters in the featherweight division, and he's also been in a very similar spot to Joanderson Brito, where he always gets so close to the rankings and then suffers a loss. He was on a bit of a winning streak, gets that fight with Mohamed Naimov, loses that fight, and now he's back in a win after beating Daniel Pineda at UFC 304. And I think Nathaniel Wood is, like I said, one of the most technically sound and well-rounded unranked featherweights out there. I think this has potential to be a really good fight. Both of them tend to be in some interesting fights as well. I can't remember the last time, apart from the Mohamed Naimov fight with Nathaniel Wood, I can't remember the last time that these guys were in a boring fight. This would be an absolute banger between two of some of the best unranked featherweights in the world. And I think this is a really good fight as well. And if Nathaniel Wood can get that win over Joanderson Brito, potentially a ranked fight next for Nathaniel Wood, which I know he's been waiting for ages. So I think for Joanderson Brito, we do him versus Nathaniel Wood, and he should have won that fight, let's be honest, against William Gomis. And for William Gomis, listen, we talk about the robbery all we want. I don't want to punish William Gomis, though. He didn't really pick the decision. He did better than I thought. So I think we have to give him a ranked fighter, considering he did just beat the best unranked featherweight in the world. I'm not going to put him against Edson Barboza because I feel like that's kind of tight, and I think that's kind of bullying on Edson Barboza. I'm going to do him versus Giga Chikadze. I'm going to do William Gomis versus Giga Chikadze. Ignore the robbery. Imagine how good this would be. Two of some of the best kickboxers in the featherweight division. This would be a kickboxer's wet dream. William Gomis versus Giga Chikadze. This is the perfect fight because if William Gomis can beat Giga Chikadze, he's now cemented himself in the top 10 of the featherweight division, and no one really cares about that robbery win over Joanderson Brito because he's just beating Giga Chikadze. And for Giga Chikadze, listen, he's lost to a lot of these top guys, recently lost to Arnold Allen, got butchered by Calvin Kattar previously as well, and I think if he can go out there and beat the big prospect, that is William Gomis, another good kickboxer, that gets a lot of eyes on Giga Chikadze, that gets him back in the winning column, and I just think this will be such an interesting fight for kickboxing. So William Gomis, Giga Chikadze, some sort of fight night next next year, maybe like a fight night co-main event, or if not, just stick on a pay-per-view. Good step up for William Gomis, good step down for Giga Chikadze, but I think overall it's such a good kickboxing fight. And then the co-main event, Brendan Allen versus Nassourdine Imavov. Nassourdine Imavov won the decision. Good control from Brendan Allen in the first round, but then he just kind of seemed to be, I know the commentator said something that Brendan Allen was saying that Nassourdine Imavov can be the hammer, but he can't be the nail. But if anything, it seemed like Brendan Allen couldn't be the nail in this fight, because every time he took a big shot from Imavov, he's like, turning around, looked like he didn't want to be there anymore. So for Brendan Allen, I think we should do him versus Jack Hermansson. I'm not trying to be some sort of, grappling nerd where I pretend to like fights that everyone else thinks are boring, but I actually kind of like this fight. It was scheduled last year. I think it was on the Albazi versus Kaikao France card. But no, I actually kind of like this matchup because you've got two of some of the best grapplers right now in the middleweight division. Jack Hermansson was once a really big grappling prospect. He was kind of like the Chimaev of 2020, and he's kind of fallen off. Got that recent good win over Joe Pyfer, and then you've got Brendan Allen, one of the best, submission grapplers in the middleweight division right now. Not like, not insane levels of grappling, but I think both of these guys are good grapplers, and they've both got good stand-up as well. I mean, Jack Hermansson was just able to beat Joe Pyfer with striking, and his striking has improved a lot. We know that Brendan Allen's got pretty decent hands as well. I think this could be a really good fight stylistically. Two guys that have good striking, great grappling, and I think this could be a really good fight for like a fight night co-main event, but knowing the UFC, they'll probably make this a main event. I mean, we had to do Sergey Spivak versus Marcin Tybura, but yeah, fighting down the rankings, Allen coming off a loss, Hermansson coming off a win, Allen versus Hermansson, get it done. And then for Nassourdine Imavov, listen, he said he wants a middleweight title shot. My only issue with that is that there are way too many middleweight contenders. There's Sean Strickland, who's going to be facing Dricus du Plessis next. There's Whittaker versus Chimaev, who's probably going to get a title shot as well. There's Caio Borralho, and now there's Imavov. There's too many contenders in the middleweight division, so I feel like we've still got to give Imavov that one more big win before a title shot. And I think that perfect fight for him is Israel Adesanya. If you tell Imavov you can fight one of the biggest stars in the UFC, a former champion, one of the greatest middleweights of all time, Israel Adesanya, before your title shot, I don't think he's going to say no. This is a massive fight for Nassourdine Imavov. By far, the biggest fight of his career. And he's probably going to get paid a bigger back for this fight than he would for facing somebody like Dricus or Strickland. So I think Imavov versus Adesanya, like I said, not that he hasn't necessarily proved himself as a contender, but there's just way too many contenders in the middleweight division. And I think it's a good fight. If he can beat Israel Adesanya, a former champion, one of the greatest, there's no doubts that he will be getting a title shot next in the middleweight division. And he'll be doing it with a lot more hype. And for Israel Adesanya, it's going to be one of his first fights in years where he's not going to be fighting for a belt, and he doesn't deserve to fight for a belt now, does he? He's lost his last two, lost to Strickland, lost to Dricus du Plessis. He needs to fight one of these contenders now, and I think Imavov is that perfect contender. It's very winnable for Adesanya, and if he can beat Nassourdine Imavov, he's back in the winning column, and knowing the UFC, they're probably going to give him an immediate title shot. So Imavov, Adesanya, 5-round non-title fight. If Imavov wins, give him a title shot, but it can also be a good layup for not a layup, but a step down for Adesanya from the recent big fights that he's been getting. So I think Imavov, one more big fight before a title shot, man. I think Adesanya is that perfect fight. And then for the main event, Renato Moicano versus Benoit Denis. Kind of disappointing that it ended in the way it did, but listen, I picked Renato Moicano to win this one by TKO. Renato Moicano won by TKO, Dr. Stoppage, whatever you want to call it. Listen, I'm the prediction king, but no. Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed that it ended in the way it did. But for Benoit Denis, he didn't look that good against Renato Moicano. I'm going to be honest. He didn't look that good. He got completely dominated in that first round. That was at least a 10-8 round. And then even in the second round, Moicano looked like he was stolen, and BSD just looked so slow. So I think we do him versus Yoel Alvarez. I talked about earlier on in the video that Yoel Alvarez is up there with one of the best unranked lightweights in the world. But I feel like Yoel Alvarez is, at this point, has done enough to secure himself a ranking spot in the lightweight division. He's one of the best finishers in the UFC. I think he's finished every single one of his wins, and I'm pretty sure he's undefeated in the UFC, with his only loss being to Arman Tsarukyan, who's now going to be challenging for a belt. He's an absolute killer, is Yoel Alvarez. He's a monster, and I feel like he's earned that fight, that shot at the lightweight ranking. So I think we do him versus Benoit Denis. BSD, let's take him away from the rankings for a minute. He got KO'd brutally by Poirier, comes back, gets demolished by Renato Moicano until the referee stops the fight. I think we do him versus Alvarez. It's a good fight for Alvarez to fight a big name in the lightweight division to get that ranking spot, and it's a very winnable fight for Alvarez as well. He's got good striking and really good jiu-jitsu. And for Benoit Denis, if he can beat one of the biggest I'm not going to say prospects, but one of the most dangerous unranked lightweights in the world, in Yoel Alvarez, it kind of secures that ranking placements for Benoit Denis, and it gets him in the winning column again. So I think we do Benoit Denis, Yoel Alvarez, and for Renato Moicano, there's only one name, and it's Paddy Pimblett. It is Paddy Pimblett. Now, you're probably thinking, listen, Moicano's, he's on a big winning streak. He's just come off 2 wins where he's had to fight down. Why would he fight the number 15th Paddy Pimblett when he's trying to go for the belt? And that's why Moicano wants one thing. He wants money. And there's no bigger fight that gives him money than Paddy Pimblett right now. They've both said that they want this fight. I think this should have happened. I thought this should have happened, or it would have been the fight to make after Paddy Pimblett and Bobby Green, but the UFC had other ideas. But now that he's beaten Benoit Denis, I think we do Moicano versus Pimblett. The build-up would be amazing. They're stylistically very interesting as well. They've both got elite jiu-jitsu in the lightweight division. Really good jiu-jitsu, both of them as well. Both of them really tough as well. And both of their striking as well. Well, I think Moicano's striking is kind of washed, but Pimblett has kind of, they've got the grappling edge. The striking edge. Moicano's probably got the grappling edge. I think it's just stylistically a really fun fight. Like, imagine Moicano versus Pimblett for like the Ultimate Fighter 2025. That'll just be scenes as well. So I think Renato Moicano, Paddy Pimblett is the longer-weighted fight in the lightweight division. Maybe it doesn't make the most sense ranking-wise, but no one's declining this fight. It's a winnable fight for both of them. It's the biggest step up for Paddy Pimblett so far, and it's also the biggest fight and probably one of the biggest money fights that Moicano's going to get in a while. So Renato Moicano versus Paddy Pimblett in some sort of pay-per-view next year, I think we do it. But that is how I would matchmake every main card fighter after UFC Paris. Let me know your thoughts on this card as a whole and your thoughts on these matchups and if you would have matched them up against anyone different. But let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.